Let's take a look now at the history of writing instruction. Writing has never received the support or respect that reading has received. It seems as though people have had more of an interest in developing children as receptors of the written word rather than producers of the written word. And one theory in this is that through reading, society can control its citizens. However, through writing, citizens have to exercise their own control. We can have control over what we give students to read, but it's harder for us to control what they write. And throughout history, adults would often use books and reading instruction to transmit society's values. Another reason why writing has never received as much attention is the simple fact that pencils were not widely available until the early part of the 20th century. Instead, children had to use ink. And we all know what that would be like in a kindergarten classroom. Messy and ink dripping everywhere on the page and getting smudges. So writing, just for that simple fact, it was just more labor intensive. Most writing up to this point was focused more on penmanship instead of actually teaching the craft of writing. The shift began to become more of a focus on content and writing instruction when Horace Mann, known as the father of education, began to push teachers to test students in writing. Previously, all testing had been done orally. By expecting teachers to then assess students through the written method, it allowed teachers to go back and review students' work and was easier to assess and kind of show growth over time. And it allowed it to have a little bit more consistency in the grading process, as opposed to trying to remember what all students had said orally. That could be very, very complicated. So once this began to happen, there began to become more of a shift in looking at teaching students how to write. And in 1935, there was a plan that was actually proposed to teach writing and for writing instruction that is really very similar to what we have with our writer's workshop today. There were 6 classroom procedures within this plan, and these included things like writing for purpose and thinking about your audience when you write, that writing can be done using several different genres, and looking at everyday genres, not just kind of report writing or research writing, but looking at writing letters and just more common forms of communication as well. As the 20th century progresses, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was a new concept in writing that was developed called process writing. And that is what we use today is process writing, where you think about the first draft, or your planning stage, and then your first draft, your revisions, and all the way through to a published piece. And in this time as well, they began to look at using portfolios to assess student writing and showing growth over time, which is as well something that we still use today quite frequently. Then in the 21st century, something happened that began to transform writing, and that was the invention of the computer. And just take a few minutes now and think about ways that we communicate in writing today. And what I find to be so fascinating is that we actually communicate in writing so much more today because of the technology that we have. And if you think about just the massive ways that we communicate through Facebook, Twitter, texting, email, we do so much more communication through writing now. And really, I feel like oral communication is becoming something more obsolete. Even in my own family, I can be upstairs and I will, instead of talking to my husband or hollering down at him, Or even when he's on his way home from work, if I need him to pick up something from the grocery store, instead of calling, which I would have done in the past, now I just send him a text. I can be up in my room and text him and say, hey, have you put the kids to bed yet? So we use written form of communication so much more today because of the technology that we have. I also think about how often we are writing to share thoughts today. If you think about Facebook, Twitter, those types of things, people are really kind of opening up this new kind of approach to writing through these media outlets. I think about just reading posts that people make on Facebook, and it's sometimes just sharing what's happening in their day so you can kind of be involved in their lives. But many times it's things that try to encourage us to invite reflection or an opportunity for them to reflect. Things that maybe try to persuade us. They might post something that they feel strongly about and try to get other people to kind of think about this concept or this idea that they have. And so there's so many different ways that we can look at writing today as being a powerful tool utilized because of the technology that we have at our fingertips. We're going to take a look now at the developmental stages of writing in young children. Let's begin with the pre-phonetic stage. Here you will find children beginning to explore the craft of writing with just random scribbling. So essentially here they're picking up a pencil and they find this tool actually produces something when they put it to paper or wall or floor, whatever they can find to scribble on. And then the next stage is controlled scribbling. Often you'll see children begin to progress from left to right, recognizing that there is some structure and organization to writing. Then we move to circular scribbling, where you'll see them actually start to form circles, ovals, more of a flow on the page. Then many children will progress during this stage to actually drawing pictures that tell a story or convey a message. So here you have maybe a self-portrait or a picture, something that is somewhat recognizable, some kind of person, creature with a face. Then the next stage, children will begin to actually experiment with mock letters, and often these will resemble letters. Like in this example, you see the E and the M kind of resembled there. But other times it could be shapes, and children may call these letters because they don't quite understand the definition of the letter yet. And I have a daughter that at the age of 2 began, she's starting to form letters and things like that, pretend to write. So that's kind of her stage right now. She a lot of times will write things but is not able to identify what it is. She can write the letter A, and because I have taught it to her, she can now write it and say the letter A. But for the longest time, she just knew how to form the letter, so she would scribble it all over the page, even though she really didn't know what it was that she was writing. In the next stage, you'll see letter strings. And this is when children actually begin to use letters, and they'll often progress from left to right and up, start at the top of the page and move down. But there's not going to be any separation between the words or the letters here to form words. Children don't recognize, there may not really be any correspondence or correlation to what they're writing. They just know letters and they just write them. So my son Micah, when he was learning to write, he knew how to spell his name. So whenever he was writing, he would use the letters M-I-C-A-H, just randomly an H, an A, a C, an M, an I, and he would just string them all together because those were letters that he knew how to form. But then when you asked him about his picture, he was telling you about the time that he was swimming in the pool. So there was no correlation, no separation between words in just random string of letters. Then we get to the next stage where they begin to maybe recognize, oh, wait a minute, I see that there are supposed to be spaces between words, but again, they may not be able to figure out the sound-syllable relationship to where the words actually make sense. The next stage is the early phonemic stage. And this stage, children actually begin to attempt to label the pictures that they are drawing with a sound that actually matches. And what you will find is that in this stage, the children will most typically find the first letter of the word. So in this first one here, picture labeling, the child has drawn a picture of a dog and put the letter D, the D, to go with the dog. And if you were to ask them to tell you about their story, they would say that they wrote the word dog there because they're able to distinguish the first sound. That's the most pronounced sound, so that's where it typically begins, is with that first sound. You'll also find that children might begin to recognize their environment and find words that maybe have been labeled in the classroom or things that they may see around the house. And so they begin to put those words into their pictures or their stories, their drawings, because it's something that they can go and copy. So they're just beginning to have an awareness of print. Stop signs, things like that. They might be able to spell or write the word stop because they're used to seeing it out and about when their parents are driving them around. And then in the end of this stage, it's called the transitional stage. This is where they begin to use kind of experimental spelling or invented spelling, where they will again use the first letter of a word to represent the entire word. So in this example, I went to the Nature Museum. So you see that they have I and then the W for went, the T for to, and then they've got the N for nature and the M for museum. So they again are hearing that first sound and able to begin to put those in a string of letters together to form a sentence. The next stage is called the letter name stage. And here they begin to recognize that there's more than one sound in a word. So previously they were able to identify that first sound. Well, the next stage of development, they can begin to recognize the ending sound. So here you've got the beginning and ending sound for the word cat. The medial sound, that's the last piece that they'll begin to distinguish, and it comes in the next stage. The transitional stage here, again, this is where the medial sound begins to come into play. So for this first example here, you've got the word grass. So the child is able to distinguish the G, the middle sound of the R, and the S. So they still don't have all of the letters correctly spell the word, but they will hear the most pronounced again, and they're able to put that in the middle. So they then move to being able to recognize that there may be another sound, grr, ass, but they a lot of times will put it in the wrong place, or they may choose the wrong vowel to spell the word. So they still don't have all of those pieces in place in this stage. In the next stage, the child does hear the beginning, middle, and ending sounds, but a lot of times they just don't have some of those spelling conventions mastered yet. So here I like to pick flowers. For example, the word like. This child is able to figure out every sound that you hear in the word like. They just haven't learned the rule yet that the silent E will go on the end of a word to make the I say its name. Same thing with the word pick. They're going to hear the P, the I, and then they're going to hear the K sound, or you might see them put the C sound, but you're not going to have them put the CK yet because they have not learned that spelling rule yet. In the next phase, they begin to write in phases as in rabbit in the sun. So they're able to, again, get a little bit more, they're putting in some of those smaller words like the, and, a, and. So they're starting to get some of those other elements of writing components. And then finally they move to whole sentence writing. And this is where you have them able to understand that we write in sentences, punctuating, getting complete thoughts written down. And then in the final stage, the conventional writing stage, this is where children are going to be writing with pretty much 100% success. Most of the time they are correcting, they're using correct spelling, or a lot of times if they don't have the correct spelling, they're able to recognize that they know that something is spelled incorrectly. And so they